Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1017. Maygur Manor. Backlund, Empress Borough, in the outskirts towards the northwest. This was a place that needed more than an hour via horse carriage. Maygur Manor was built by the side of the Tussock River, so it had beautiful scenery around it with flourishing vegetation within its confines. Strangely enough, Backlund's city areas had perennial rain with relatively few sunny days. However, in the outskirts, the clouds tended to be thin, and the sun was always bright. Despite the short distance, the two places had completely different weather. It was most obvious within the northwestern outskirts. It was even a rather famous grape plantation in the northern continent. And by following the Tussock River from this region northwest for another 50 kilometers, one would again encounter weather similar to Backlund's city area. Such situations left meteorologists puzzled. They couldn't find any suitable theories to explain the reason. However, Klein had a vague guess. In the Fourth Epoch, this was the capital of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. It was also here that Blood Emperor Alista abandoned his humanity and became a crazy deity. Therefore, it was normal that the weather and terrain had changed forever in those very small confines. Leonard Mitchell had once mentioned information about this during one of the free exchanges. Furthermore, as an area with a long history and signs of early human activity, this land of hope buried countless ancient ruins. It was very possible that they could have an influence on the weather. The carriage drove into Maygur Manor, passing by the fountain pond and small garden that was surrounded by the main building. Finally, it stopped outside the main door. Just as Klein got off the carriage with butler Walter, he saw the land steward, Richardson, lead 2 rows of male and female servants by the door, awaiting their employer. Compared to 160 Barrio Clun Street, there were more servants here, but they were mainly lower-class servants. Looking at Richardson wearing a spanking new suit, Klein nodded with a smile. "Well done." Without waiting for Richardson to reply, he took off his hat and handed it along with his cane to his valet, Anani, while asking, "Have you prepared the activity room for the ladies to chat and for men to play cards in?" "Yes, sir. I've placed poker cards, tarot cards, and some board games. The piano, violins, and other common musical instruments have also been moved inside," Richardson answered eloquently. Klein passed through the door and nodded. "Where's the smoking room for the gentlemen?" "Like the ladies, it's all on the second floor. They're separated by 5 rooms. Richardson didn't need the servants in the manor to remind him. He didn't even need to recall to give an answer. To ensure that his employer's first hunting excursion was flawless, he had taken note of every nitty-gritty detail. Although it exhausted him physically, he was excited mentally. Klein asked about dinner and the guest rooms and confirmed that everything was in place. Before long, he received the first batch of guests after Maygur Manor had a change of name, now known as Dante's Manor. Member of Parliament Mocht and his family. "This place is much bigger than my Moose Manor." Mocht took off his coat with a smile and handed it to a servant while praising. "I've always heard of Maygur's wine being of excellent quality, but I've never had the chance of tasting it. I can finally have my curiosity satisfied today. I hope you won't be disappointed." Klein smiled modestly. As a famous area for grape plantations in the northern continent, champagne, red wine, and white wine were considered the finest in Backlund's northwestern outskirts. But with the manor here mainly owned by the nobles, self-brewed alcoholic beverages were typically not sold to the public. Therefore, it was almost unheard of. Only people from high society, or those related to them, would know of this. Maygur was one of the most iconic manors. The wine that it brewed was widely praised by people in the know. Red wine of certain years was even offered at more than £100 a bottle by collectors. However, for Klein to be able to buy this manor for £20,000, he naturally had to agree to certain conditions. All the wine from certain years were to be taken away by Duke Negan's servants. Mocht was rather clear about this and didn't expect to drink famous wine commodities. He said with a laugh, "You can open a few bottles and pour a small glass of each for me. Let me decide which of the remaining wine is most spectacular." As a member of high society, he had never tasted the wine of Maygur Manor. The reason was simple: he was a member of the new party, and the previous owner, Duke Negan, was the main sponsor of the Conservative Party. No problem, Klein immediately agreed as his gaze swept across Hazel's face. Compared to July and August, this girl had clearly cheered up. She no longer felt apprehensive when facing strangers. Previously, it was as bad as not willing to participate in any banquets or balls. This made those familiar with her think she was sick. And this was all thanks to Audrey. Whenever she met Dwayne Dantes at the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, she had mentioned that she had recently met Miss Hazel Mock twice. Such communication didn't seem problematic at first glance since Hazel was a common acquaintance of Audrey and Dantes. Finding a topic about a common friend was common in idle chatter. However, Klein could read Miss Justice's hints and understood that she had met Hazel twice at different balls and banquets, and had treated her twice. After getting Mock's family settled in, Klein welcomed the second batch of guests for the weekend hunting trip: Brigadier General Conas Kilgore, who had come with a friend that he had previously mentioned. Klein knew this friend, but he didn't know Dwayne Dantes. He was a steam car mogul, from his cage. He was one of the main investors of the bicycle project. He had relied on a lawyer suspected to be a beyonder with the lawyer sequence, and had bought the 10% shares from Sherlock Moriarty at a cheap price. Since he's related to a lawyer, it can be explained how he's an Earl of the Fallen's friend. Klein went forward with a smile and hugged Brigadier General Conas and from his cage. "Welcome." He then stepped back and said to the portly, light blue-eyed from his who was a quarter-face sack, "I heard your steam car is very famous. Why didn't you drive it over?" Before Frommiz could answer, the manly Conas Kilgore said with a smile, "No, you don't understand him. He will never give up the chance to showcase his steam car. However, the car's too heavy. On the way here, it fell into a ditch and couldn't be pulled out. Thankfully, I never believed his claims and rode on a carriage myself, following behind him. Otherwise, he would have had to cover the remaining distance on foot. The main problem is that our roads are terrible. They need to be renovated and rebuilt. They need metal tracks to be paved, just like steam locomotives." Frommiz retorted and threw his hands up. "I was planning on seeking some investments from you. Haha, we can talk about it later. You were the one who invested in us previously, but now you're asking me for an investment." Only then did Klein realize that he was a rather famous tycoon in the upper class of the kingdom. He had donated shares worth more than £10,000 and had purchased an expensive manor. He had also established connections with the military, so it was obvious he was rich. "But in fact, my current net worth is only 50 to 60,000 gold pounds, perhaps a tenth of Miss Justice's wealth. I wonder when I can really become a tycoon with a net worth of £1,000,000. Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. After some thought, he said, "It's fine. I'm very interested in the fusion of machinery and steam. When I'm free, I can take a look at your steam car." "Spectacular," Frommiz immediately said with a smile. "If I didn't know that you had donated a large sum to the Church of Evernight, I might even think of you as a believer of the god of steam. I've drawn the triangular sacred emblem on my chest in the past after all." Klein didn't continue on this topic, afraid that Conas would discover his intentions. He pointed to the staircase and said, "Why don't you head to the smoking room to try some of the prized cigar collections here? It wasn't until I bought this manor that I learned that there was a room specially for storing cigars. Its temperature and humidity are maintained, but as you know, I can smoke, but I don't like it." "Not bad. Do you have chieftain?" Conas Kilgore's face suffused a smile. "Of course." Klein gave a positive answer. There was only one goal in organizing this hunting trip. It was to hunt this Brigadier General, Deputy Director of MI9. Therefore, he had taken into consideration all his preferences. However, Klein wasn't in a hurry to take action for this hunting trip. This was because he still lacked an understanding of Conas Kilgore's actual strength as a hidden demigod. He needed more gatherings and hunts to figure out his preferences, level of alertness, and the items he brought with him. As a magician, Klein didn't perform unprepared. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furs put down the book in her hand and looked at Zio, who was pacing around the activity room. She couldn't help but ask, "What are you troubled about?" Zio shot her a glance and said, "I'm frustrated over whether to inform MI9 about Viscount Stratford's close relationship with an unknown woman, or to keep it from them until there's further development." "Why are you keeping it from them?" Furs first asked in return before giving her answer. "Viscount Stratford is related to your father's death, but you normally lack the opportunity or strength to confront him, afraid of being exposed and affecting your mother and brother. And now, he might encounter an accident because of that unknown woman. He's in a relatively easy to deal with state. This is your opportunity, so you're being hesitant, right?" Zio fell silent for a moment before saying, "Yes." Furs closed the book, stared at her friend, and said in a serious manner, "Since you're hesitating, it means you're already inclined towards one option." Zio slowly nodded and said, "Yes." Furs fondled her slightly long curly hair and stood up, extending her right hand, and said, "I already know your decision. Well, do you need help?" Seeing Zio hesitant to give an answer, she laughed and said, "I'm a Sequence 6 Beyonder." Without waiting for Zio to answer, she looked around. "If you're worried, we can still seek additional help." She was implying that they could get help from the members of the Tarot Club. Zio thought about it and exhaled. "Not for now. Let's try it first. Let's head out now and continue monitoring Viscount Stratford." "Now?" Furs was taken aback. "All right. But before that, let me use the crystal ball to do some astromancy to confirm the level of danger." After some work, she held the pure crystal ball in one hand and said, "There's a certain level of danger.